An innocent birthday dare was never supposed to become a death sentence or spark a dangerous obsession. Penelope only wanted to prove her friends wrong when she kissed the terrifying stranger in the corner booth. She had absolutely no idea he ruled the city's underworld. Now there is no turning back. The air inside Chicago's exclusive Berkshire room was thick with the scent of gin botanicals, expensive perfume, and melted wax. Jordan Gallagher sat at a curved leather booth, nursing her third gin and tonic, her fingers anxiously picking at the condensation on the glass. It was her best friend Harper's 30th birthday, and the table was littered with empty shot glasses and half-eaten charcuterie boards. Jordan or Penny, to anyone who knew her, felt wildly out of place. She always did in places like this. At a solid size 20, with thick, heavy curves, a soft belly she usually tried to hide behind oversized blazers and wide hips, she was acutely aware of the space she occupied. Tonight, however, Harper had forced her into a deep, ruby-red wrap dress from Torrid that hugged every dip and swell of her body. Penny felt simultaneously beautiful and terrifyingly exposed. She was used to being the funny, reliable, invisible, fat friend who held the group's purses while they flirted. She wasn't used to being looked at, and yet someone was looking. "Okay, Pen, your turn," Harper slurred slightly, slamming her hand on the mahogany table. "Truth or dare?" "Truth," Penny said immediately. She wasn't an idiot. "Boring," groaned their co-worker, a junior HR rep named Bridget. "You always pick truth. Come on, Penny, live a little. You're wearing a killer dress, your hair is blown out, and you've been hiding in this booth for 2 hours. Penny sighed, her cheeks burning. "Fine, dare. But nothing illegal, and I am not doing a body shot off the bartender again. Last time I bruised my knee." Harper's eyes glinted with malicious, alcohol-fueled glee. She scanned the dimly lit lounge, her gaze sweeping past the young finance bros in their Patagonia vests and the tourists sipping overpriced cocktails. Finally, her eyes locked onto the far, shadowy corner of the room. "I dare you," Harper whispered, leaning in so the whole table had to huddle, to go over there and kiss him. Penny followed Harper's manicured finger. In the most secluded booth, effectively blocked off from the rest of the bar by the sheer, heavy energy of the space, sat a man. He wasn't just any man. He looked like a storm condensed into human form. He wore a bespoke, charcoal-grey suit that screamed Italian, tailoring the collar of his crisp white shirt, unbuttoned to reveal a sliver of tanned skin. He had jet-black hair, a sharp, unyielding jawline, and eyes so dark they looked like voids. He wasn't drinking. He was just sitting there turning a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid, likely Macallan 18, in slow, deliberate circles. What terrified Penny more than his striking, lethal face were the 3 men standing in a loose semicircle around his booth. They wore dark suits, had cauliflower ears, and their eyes scanned the room with predatory efficiency. "Harper, are you insane?" Penny hissed, her heart kicking against her ribs. "Those guys look like they're in the Mafia. Look at them. They look like they eat people." "Oh, please, this is River North, not The Godfather." Harper laughed dismissively. "He's probably just some grumpy tech CEO who thinks he's important. Kiss him on the lips. 10 seconds, or you have to pay for the entire bar tab tonight." Penny looked at the bill on the table. It was already pushing $600. She worked as an auditor at a mid-level logistics firm. She did not have $600 to drop on Casamigos tequila she didn't even drink. She looked back at the man. He was staring straight ahead, his expression one of terrifying boredom. 10 seconds, Penny muttered, downing the rest of her gin for liquid courage. The alcohol hit her bloodstream like a match dropped in dry grass. Why not, she thought, a sudden, unfamiliar wave of reckless rebellion washing over her. Why do I always have to be the safe, cautious one? Why do I always have to be the invisible fat girl? She stood up. The ruby wrap dress swished around her heavy thighs. She felt her stomach press against the fabric, but she threw her shoulders back and walked forward. The click of her black heels on the hardwood floor seemed deafening to her own ears. As she approached the corner booth, the atmosphere changed. The ambient noise of the bar seemed to dull. The three large men in suits immediately noticed her. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a jagged scar across his chin, stepped directly into her path, crossing his massive arms. "Private table, miss," he rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "Turn around." Penny froze, the liquid courage evaporating instantly. She was about to apologize and scurry away when a voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, a low, smooth baritone that didn't need volume to command absolute authority. "Stand down, Matteo." The wall of muscle immediately stepped aside. Penny blinked, suddenly face to face with the man in the booth. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His dark eyes flicked over her, taking in her flushed face, the generous curve of her breasts, spilling over the V-neck her wide hips, and the nervous trembling of her hands. He didn't look at her with the polite dismissal she was used to from attractive men. He looked at her like a predator, evaluating a very unexpected meal. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat. Penny swallowed hard, her mind totally blanking. She couldn't tell him about the dare. It felt childish under the weight of his stare. So acting on pure adrenaline-fueled instinct, she didn't say a word. She leaned down, grabbed the lapels of his expensive wool suit, and pressed her mouth to his. For a fraction of a second, the world completely stopped. Penny expected to be shoved away. She expected his guards to grab her by the hair and toss her into the alley. Instead, a large, calloused hand clamped around the back of her neck. He didn't pull away. He leaned into it. His mouth was hard and demanding, parting her lips with shocking ease. He tasted like expensive Scotch dark chocolate and pure, concentrated danger. The hand on the back of her neck held her firmly in place, while his other hand slid down her back, resting heavily on the curve of her hip, his long fingers pressing into her soft flesh, as if memorizing the shape of her. Penny's knees gave out. She whimpered a tiny, embarrassing sound, completely overwhelmed by the sheer dominating force of the man. The kiss lasted exactly 10 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime of sensory overload. When he finally broke the kiss, he didn't let her go. He kept his face inches from hers, his chest rising and falling slowly. His dark eyes were no longer bored. They were burning with a dark, terrifying intensity. "You're shaking," he murmured, his thumb brushing against her racing pulse at her neck. I have to go," Penny gasped, practically tearing herself out of his grip. As she backed away, her chest heaving, the man leaned back against the leather booth. He tilted his head, watching her with a look that made a shiver rack her spine. "You have exactly 10 minutes to leave this city before I decide to keep you," he whispered. Penny didn't wait to see if he was joking. She turned on her heel, grabbed her purse from Harper's shocked grip, and practically ran out the front doors onto Wabash Avenue, flagging down a yellow cab with trembling hands. She thought it was over. She thought it was just a stupid dare. She had no idea she had just shoved her tongue down the throat of Dominic Castellano, the undisputed head of the Chicago outfit. The next morning, Penny felt like she had been hit by a freight train. Her head pounded from the gin, but the hangover was nothing compared to the mortification churning in her gut. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the grip of Dominic's hand on her neck, the scent of his cologne, and that terrifying final threat. "I decide to keep you." She shook off the memory, wrapping her thick cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she walked into the sterile, fluorescent-lit offices of Harrison and Meyer Logistics in the Loop. Normalcy. Spreadsheets. Excel formulas. This was her world. Safe, predictable, and incredibly boring. She settled into her cubicle, firing up her dual monitors. Her current project was an external audit for a new massive client that had just signed with their firm Apex Waste Management and Sanitation. It was a massive contract, and her boss, Mr. Harrison, had been sweating bullets over the onboarding process. Penny pulled up the ledger, adjusting her blue light glasses. For the first 2 hours, the numbers were a comforting blur. But by 11 a.m., her brow was deeply furrowed. Something was wrong with Apex's books. She cross-referenced the Q3 fuel expenses with the GPS mileage logs of their garbage trucks. The numbers didn't just mismatch, they were astronomically disproportionate. According to the ledger, Apex was spending millions on fuel for trucks that hadn't moved out of the depot in 6 months. Furthermore, there were phantom payroll accounts, hundreds of consultants receiving weekly cash disbursements via a shell corporation headquartered in Delaware. "This isn't a mistake," Penny muttered to herself, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "This is money laundering. Textbook, highly organized money laundering." She was reaching for her desk phone to call Mr. Harrison when a shadow fell over her cubicle. She looked up. Standing there was a man in a delivery uniform, holding a long, matte black rectangular box. "Jordan Gallagher?" he asked, checking a clipboard. Yes." He handed her the box and walked away without asking for a signature. Penny stared at it. It was tied with a thick silk ribbon. With trembling fingers, she pulled the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a single, perfect white rose. Beside it was a heavy cardstock envelope. She opened it. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, and written in dark fountain pen ink. "Your 10 minutes expired." Penny stopped breathing. The box slipped from her hands, clattering onto her desk. She scrambled out of her chair, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She practically ran to the floor-to-ceiling window of her office building, looking down at the street 12 stories below. Parked illegally in front of the fire hydrant was a massive, pitch-black Lincoln Navigator. A man in a dark suit was leaning against the hood, looking straight up at her window. It was Matteo, the man from the bar. Panic seized her throat. She had to get out of there. She grabbed her purse, didn't even lock her computer screen, and bolted for the elevator. She wasn't waiting for her boss. She wasn't dealing with the fraudulent spreadsheets. She just needed to go home, lock her door, and maybe move to Canada. She took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage, where her old Honda Civic was parked, on level P3. The concrete structure was dim, echoing with the faint drip of a leaking pipe and the hum of fluorescent lights. She speed-walked toward her car, her keys clutched between her knuckles like a makeshift weapon. She hit the unlock button. The Honda beeped. Before she could pull the door handle, 2 sleek black SUVs rounded the concrete pillar, their tires screeching loudly before boxing her car in entirely. The glaring headlights pinned her like a deer in the headlights, highlighting her terrified face and the heavy, panicked rise and fall of her chest. 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They were all armed. She could see the distinct bulges under their tailored jackets. Then the back door of the lead SUV opened, and Dominic Castellano stepped out into the damp, echoing garage. He was no longer wearing the charcoal suit. Today he wore a black turtleneck and an overcoat that made his broad shoulders look impossibly wide. He walked toward her with a slow, predatory grace. The air in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Penny backed up until her spine hit the cold metal of her Honda. She was trembling so violently, She thought her knees would buckle. Dominic stopped a few feet away from her. He looked her up and down, his dark eyes, taking in her sensible slacks, her oversized cardigan, her messy bun. He didn't look disappointed that the glamorous girl in the red dress was gone. He looked fascinated. "Jordan," he said. His voice echoed off the concrete walls, smooth and deadly. How do you know my name?" She choked out tears of absolute terror, pricking her eyes. "Please, I'm sorry. It was a dare, a stupid, drunken dare. I don't have any money, but I promise I'll never go to that bar again. Just let me go." Dominic stepped closer, entering her personal space. He reached out his leather-gloved hand, gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from her damp cheek. Penny flinched, but she couldn't look away from his eyes. "You think I tracked you down because of a kiss, Piccola?" he asked softly. "Didn't you?" A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across his lips. "The kiss was a complication, a highly enjoyable one. But the reason I am here, Jordan, is because of what you did while you were kissing me." Penny blinked, completely confused. "I didn't do anything. I just kissed you and ran at exactly 11:14 p.m. last night," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. A sniper from a rival syndicate had a laser sight aimed directly at the back of my skull through the south window of the Berkshire room. He was waiting for a clear shot. Penny gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Dominic stepped even closer until his broad chest brushed against her soft stomach. And right as he was about to pull the trigger, a beautiful, brave woman in a red dress stepped into his line of sight, grabbed my collar, and blocked his view entirely. Penny's mind spun. She hadn't just kissed him. She had used her body, her large, imposing body that she had spent her whole life trying to shrink to inadvertently shield a Mafia boss from an assassin's bullet. "You saved my life, Jordan," Dominic murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "And in doing so, you compromised the hit. The hit man saw you. He saw your face. He saw you leave." "Oh my God," Penny whispered, her legs finally giving out. Dominic caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her thick waist, holding her securely against his solid frame. "They know who you are." Dominic continued his tone, turning ice-cold as he looked over her head at his men. "And they know you work for a firm auditing Apex Waste Management, my primary laundering front. They think you are one of my agents. They think you are mine." Penny looked up at him, absolute horror dawning in her eyes. I'm an accountant." Dominic's grip on her tightened, a possessive, terrifying gleam in his dark eyes. "Not anymore," he said. "Get in the car, Jordan. Your old life ended the second your lips touched mine." The ride to the Castellano estate was a blur of tinted windows, heavy silence, and the scent of expensive leather. Jordan sat rigidly in the back of the armored SUV, her thick thighs pressed firmly together, her hands gripping her sensible tote bag like a shield. Beside her, Dominic radiated a terrifying, calm heat. He was casually checking messages on a burner phone, completely unfazed by the fact that he had just kidnapped an auditor from an underground parking garage. They drove north, leaving the dense skyscrapers of Chicago behind, until the landscape shifted to the sprawling, heavily wooded estates of Lake Forest. The SUV slowed, turning onto a private road, flanked by towering iron gates. Armed guards, blending into the shadows of the ancient oak trees, nodded as the vehicle passed. "This is madness," Penny finally whispered, her voice trembling. "You cannot just take me. I have a cat, I have rent. I have a boss who is probably calling the police right now." Dominic turned his head slowly. The ambient light from the dashboard illuminated the sharp angles of his face. "Your boss, mister. Harrison received a highly classified email 30 minutes ago stating you were recruited for a sudden corporate espionage task force. Your rent has been paid for the next 5 years, and your cat, an overweight tabby named Barnaby, is already resting comfortably in the east wing of my home." Penny stared at him, her mouth opening and closing in sheer disbelief. "You stole my cat. I relocated your cat," Dominic corrected smoothly as the vehicle parked in front of a sprawling limestone mansion. "I protect what belongs to me, Jordan. And right now, you are the most valuable asset I possess." Over the next 48 hours, Penny was essentially a prisoner in a golden cage. She was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment. The closets were filled with clothes in her exact size, rich silk robes, cashmere sweaters and tailored trousers that accommodated her wide hips and heavy curves perfectly. For a girl who had spent her entire life struggling to find garments that did not pinch, squeeze, or shame her body, the bespoke wardrobe felt like a seductive, manipulative trap. But the real trap was Dominic himself. He did not lock her away. Instead, he forced her into his world. On the third night, he summoned her to his private study. The room smelled of old paper cigar smoke and polished mahogany. Dominic sat behind a massive desk, staring at a stack of printed spreadsheets. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the velvet chair across from him. Penny walked over, intensely aware of how the soft, emerald-green silk robe clung to her heavy breasts and draped over her thick waist. She sat down, crossing her arms defensively over her stomach. "My men have been intercepting communications from the O'Malley Syndicate." Dominic began, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "They were the ones who ordered the hit at the Berkshire room. Finn O'Malley has been trying to claim my territory for 3 years, but he has never been bold enough to strike in public. Someone gave him confidence. Someone gave him my itinerary." "What does that have to do with me?" Penny asked, her voice shaking slightly under the weight of his intense gaze. Dominic slid the spreadsheets across the desk. Penny recognized them instantly. They were the Apex Waste Management ledgers she had been analyzing the morning she was taken. "You found something before my men pulled you out," Dominic said softly. "My accountants said the books were perfectly clean. But when Matteo hacked your workstation, he saw you had flagged 50 different transit lines." Penny looked down at the numbers. The familiar comfort of mathematics washed over her, temporarily dulling her terror. "Your accountants are either incompetent or lying," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Look here. The fuel expenditures do not match the GPS routing for the sanitation trucks. You have millions bleeding out into a shell company under the guise of consultant fees." Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, the Mafia boss and the auditor worked side by side. Dominic moved his chair around the desk, sitting so close to Penny that his broad shoulder brushed against hers. She could feel the hard, coiled muscle beneath his shirt. He did not seem repulsed by her size. In fact, every time she shifted, his eyes dropped to the soft curves of her body with a dark, consuming hunger that made her pulse race furiously. "The money is being funneled to a bank in the Cayman Islands," Penny explained, tracing a thick finger down the printed columns. "But it is not going to the O'Malleys. It is an internal leak. Someone inside your own organization is skimming your profits, starving your resources, and likely selling your location to the O'Malleys to cover their tracks." Dominic's jaw clenched. The air in the room grew suffocatingly heavy. "Can you trace the final account?" "I need access to the mainframe," Penny said, looking up at him. "And I need the encryption keys." Before Dominic could answer, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. Matteo stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, a look of pure panic on his scarred face. "Boss!" Matteo barked. "We have a massive problem. They grabbed the girl." Penny's blood ran cold. "What girl?" "Your friend," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "Harper." Penny stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "No, Harper has nothing to do with this. She just wanted me to do a stupid dare." "The O'Malleys do not care," Dominic said, standing up to his full imposing height. "They saw her at the table with you. They know you disappeared. They are using her to flush you out." Matteo stepped further into the room. "Finn O'Malley just called the burner. He wants to arrange a trade. The accountant for the blonde. Midnight at the abandoned rail yards on the south side." Penny felt the room spin. She gripped the edge of the mahogany desk, her knuckles turning white. Harper was superficial and annoying, but she was her best friend. She did not deserve to be dragged into a brutal underworld war because of a 10-second kiss. "I have to go," Penny said, her voice cracking. "I have to trade myself." Dominic crossed the room in 2 massive strides, grabbing Penny by the shoulders. His grip was entirely unyielding. "You are not going anywhere. You belong to me. Nobody touches what is mine. She will die because of me." Penny screamed, tears spilling over her flushed cheeks. "You do not understand. I am nobody. I am just the fat, invisible friend. Let them take me." Dominic's expression darkened into something terrifyingly feral. He backed her up against the heavy bookshelves, his massive frame trapping her completely. He reached up his large hands, cupping her tear-stained face, his thumbs wiping away the moisture with surprising gentleness. "You are not invisible to me," Dominic growled, his voice vibrating with a raw, dangerous obsession. "From the second your lips touched mine, you became the only thing I see. Your body is perfect. You are substantial. You are real. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take you." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a nervous dare this time. It was a brutal, possessive brand. His mouth devoured hers, demanding total surrender. Penny gasped into his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to grip his broad shoulders. The sheer heat of his desire shattered every insecurity she had ever held about her body. He worshipped her softness, his hands sliding down to grip her wide hips, pulling her flush against his hard, lethal frame. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. "Matteo!" Dominic barked, without looking away from Penny's swollen lips. "Prepare the men. We are not making a trade. We are going to war." The compound became a fortress of frantic, violent preparation. Heavily armed men loaded tactical gear into dark, armored vehicles. Penny was ushered into a secure bunker, beneath the mansion, surrounded by humming servers and glowing monitors. "You have 1 hour, Dominic told her, racking his pistol. "Trace that Cayman account. Find out who betrayed me." Penny sat at the terminal, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. The fear that had paralyzed her earlier morphed into a cold, desperate focus. She bypassed the superficial firewalls of the Apex system, digging deep into the buried code. The shell company was heavily protected, utilizing complex routing algorithms to hide the ultimate beneficiary of the stolen Mafia funds. But the architect of the fraud had made one crucial, arrogant mistake. They used the exact same IP address to access the Cayman funds that they used to log into the Castellano internal security grid. Penny's breath hitched as the final decryption sequence finished. A single name flashed across the dark screen. The hidden beneficiary was listed as Lucia Moretti. Penny frowned and quickly searched the name through the public records database Dominic had recently provided. Lucia Moretti was a deceased Italian immigrant. However, she had a son who carried his mother's maiden name before changing it to blend into the Castellano ranks. Penny stared at the screen as absolute horror washed over her. It was definitely Matteo. Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the server bunker slammed shut, locking with a very loud electronic beep. Penny spun around in her rolling chair. Standing by the door completely alone was Matteo. He held a silenced pistol directly aimed at her chest. "You work fast, Jordan," Matteo sneered, his gravelly voice dropping its respectful facade. "Far too fast, honestly." "It was always you," Penny whispered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "You kidnapped Harper to lure Dominic into an ambush tonight." Matteo chuckled darkly. "Dominic became a weak businessman. The O'Malleys promised me half the territory if I delivered him. It would have worked perfectly if you had not put your fat face in the bullet's direct path." Penny swallowed hard. "Dominic trusts you." Matteo raised the gun. "Goodbye, Jordan. I will just tell the boss the O'Malleys breached the bunker." Penny squeezed her eyes shut. The explosion that followed deafened her, but she felt absolutely no pain. She opened her eyes just in time to see the reinforced glass of the bunker's observation window completely shatter violently. Dominic Castellano dropped from the ventilation access above landing with the brutal grace of a predator. Matteo panicked, swinging his weapon toward his boss, but Dominic was infinitely faster. With a single beautiful fluid motion, Dominic fired his own weapon twice. Matteo gasped, dropping his pistol, before collapsing backward onto the cold concrete floor, staring blankly at the grey ceiling. Dominic holstered his weapon, stepping over the shattered glass. He pulled Penny out of the chair, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I found the rat," she sobbed. "I know," Dominic murmured, kissing her head. "You saved my life again." With the traitor dead, the tide turned. Dominic's men flanked the O'Malley forces, quickly dismantling them entirely. By dawn, the sprawling estate was quiet. Penny stood on the balcony, watching Harper leave safely. Dominic wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against his chest. "You belong to the shadows now," he whispered, kissing her deeply. "You belong to me." Penny dropped her blanket, fully embracing her beautiful curves. "Then you better have a good dental plan." Did you love this thrilling, dark Mafia romance? If Penny's dangerous journey with Dominic kept you on the absolute edge of your seat, smash that like button. Right now, do not forget to share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and hit subscribe to join our community for more thrilling stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest explosive tales. Drop a comment down below right now. Would you have kissed the handsome boss?